Let me ask you something that might feel a little uncomfortable. What if the reason you struggle to feel enough, the reason you overthink relationships, or the reason you feel oddly empty even when life looks fine on the outside, isn't because something bad happened to you as a child, but because something important never did? Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you might see your childhood and yourself in a completely different way. When people think about childhood trauma, they imagine obvious things: abuse, yelling, chaos, neglect you can see. But emotional neglect is different. It's quiet, invisible, and often comes from parents who truly loved their children. That's what makes it so hard to recognize. And today, I'm going to walk you through 5 subtle signs of childhood emotional neglect that most people miss, sometimes for decades. As you listen, notice what resonates. You don't need to diagnose yourself. Just stay curious. Let's start with the first sign, because this one shows up in almost every adult who grew up emotionally unseen. 1. You struggle to identify or trust your own feelings. Have you ever been asked, "How do you feel?" and your mind just goes blank? Not because you don't have feelings, but because you don't know how to access them. Many adults who experienced emotional neglect learned early on that emotions were ignored, minimized, or quietly inconvenient. So instead of learning how to feel, they learned how to shut down. You might say things like, "I don't know why I feel this way. I shouldn't be upset. Others have it worse." But here's the key insight most people miss. If your emotions were never acknowledged as a child, your nervous system learned that feelings are unsafe or pointless. So now, as an adult, you may second-guess your reactions, feel disconnected from your body, or rely on logic instead of emotion in relationships. This isn't emotional weakness, it's emotional conditioning, and it leads directly into the second sign. If this already feels uncomfortably familiar, don't click away. The next sign often explains why relationships feel so exhausting. 2. You feel deeply responsible for other people's emotions. Do you often feel like it's your job to keep the peace? Like if someone is upset, it must somehow be your fault? This is extremely common in adults who grew up emotionally neglected. As a child, you may have learned that your emotions didn't matter, but other people's emotions did. So you adapted. You became the easy child, the mature one, the one who didn't cause problems. Over time, this turns into emotional hypervigilance. You scan rooms, you read tone changes, you adjust yourself constantly. In the cost, you lose touch with your own needs. You might feel guilty asking for support, or uncomfortable when attention is on you, or anxious when someone is upset even when it has nothing to do with you. Here's the reframe that changes everything. You were trained to be emotionally responsible too early, and that training didn't disappear when you grew up. But what happens when you spend your life managing everyone else's emotions? You often develop the third sign, one that hides in plain sight. You feel different, but can't explain why. This one is subtle and deeply painful. You might feel like you don't fully belong anywhere. Something is off about you. Other people seem more connected, more real, more alive, but you can't point to a clear reason. From the outside, your life might look fine. Good job, functional relationships, no dramatic trauma story. Yet internally, there's a quiet loneliness. That loneliness often comes from not being emotionally mirrored as a child. When parents reflect a child's feelings, naming them, validating them, the child learns, "This is who I am." When that doesn't happen, the child grows up with a blurry sense of self. So as an adult, you might change yourself depending on who you're with, feel unsure of your identity, or struggle to answer questions like, "What do you want?" This isn't because you're lost, it's because no one helped you find yourself emotionally. And that leads us to a sign many people completely misunderstand. If you've ever wondered why love feels so confusing, this next sign might be the missing piece. 4. You minimize your needs in relationships. Do you tell yourself things like, "I don't need much," "I'm low maintenance," "I can handle it"? At first glance, that sounds like independence, but often it's actually emotional self-abandonment. If your needs were dismissed or ignored as a child, you learned a powerful lesson. Needing too much leads to disappointment, so you adapt by asking less, expecting less, and tolerating more than you should. You may stay in relationships where your emotional needs aren't met, you feel unseen, or you're the one doing most of the emotional work. And the most heartbreaking part, you might not even realize you're allowed to want more. Here's the truth that many emotionally neglected adults need to hear for the first time. Having needs does not make you a burden, it makes you human. Take a breath for a moment, because the final sign often explains why people don't realize any of this until much later in life. 5. You downplay your childhood because it wasn't that bad. This is the sign that keeps people stuck the longest. You might say, "My parents did their best. Others had it worse. Nothing terrible happened." And all of that might be true, but emotional neglect isn't about what happened, it's about what was missing. No one taught you how to understand your emotions, feel safe expressing them, or trust that your inner world mattered, so you learned to survive without that guidance. And survival can look like success until you start asking deeper questions. Healing doesn't require blaming your parents, it requires acknowledging your experience. You can honor their effort and recognize your unmet needs. Both can exist at the same time. If you recognized yourself in any of these signs, here's what I want you to know. There is nothing wrong with you. Your struggles make sense in the context of what you didn't receive, and awareness is the beginning of change. The moment you name emotional neglect, it stops being invisible, and once it's visible, it becomes healable. If this video put words to something you felt but never understood, you're not alone. And if you want to explore how emotional neglect shows up in adult relationships, self-worth, and healing, there's more coming. You don't need to rush, just stay curious. Sometimes understanding your past is the first act of self-compassion. I'll see you in the next one.